little fox.
Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 6, Lilliput in Danger.
There are two political groups in Lilliput,
began Reldresal.
the high heels and the low heels. The groups are named after the style of shoes their members wear. Once, the high heels were the most popular group.
Reldresal went on.
Our king and his officials, however, are low heels.
Do the two groups get along? I asked.
Oh no, the two groups hate each other,
said Reldresal.
The king is afraid that the high heels may try to take his power.
And could they?
Perhaps. We think that there are more high heels than low heels in Lilliput,
said Reldresal.
What's worse, the king is very upset with his son, the Prince of Lilliput. The prince wears one shoe with a high heel. His other shoe has a low heel. That's why the prince moves up and down as he walks. The king also has enemies in other places.
Reldresal continued.
Lilliput and a nearby island, Blefuscu, have been at war for 3 years.
That island to the east. Reldresal nodded. How did this war start? I asked.
The war began over how people cut open boiled eggs.
Reldresal explained. I beg your pardon? I thought that I had misunderstood his words. I was still learning Lilliputian.
Boiled eggs,
he repeated.
People in Lilliput like to eat boiled eggs. An egg has a big end and a small pointed end. Almost everyone in Lilliput used to cut open their boiled eggs at the big end. The problem started when our king's grandfather was a little boy. He was then the prince of Lilliput, and his father was the king. One day, the prince cut open his egg at the big end. He got careless and cut his finger. The king got very angry because the prince was hurt. That day, the king made a new law. From then on, everyone in Lilliput had to cut open their boiled eggs at the small end. Small enders are people who obey the law. Big enders refuse to obey the law.
I suppose, I said, that these two groups also hate each other?
Correct. Over the years they have had many fights,
said Reldresal.
Our current king is a small ender. Some big enders have gone to live in Blefuscu. The king of Blefuscu would like to take over Lilliput, and the big enders support him. We have heard rumors that the Blefuscan king plans to attack Lilliput with many ships. Can you find a way to help us?
Reldresal, I said. I'm sure I can. He told me that more than 50 ships were in the harbor at Blefuscu. Only about a kilometer of sea separates the two islands. The water between them is quite shallow. For the next few days, I kept away from the shore of Lilliput that is opposite Blefuscu. I did not want the Blefuscans to see me. I had figured out a plan for helping the king of Lilliput. But if the Blefuscans knew about me, my plan would fail. A few days later, I spoke to the king. I have a secret plan, I said, to steal many of the Blefuscan ships. Then your enemies will not be able to invade Lilliput.
I would appreciate your help, enormous one,
replied the king. After I explained my plan, he said,
Tell me what you need to make your plan work.
Have your workmen make 50 very large metal hooks, I told him. I need lots of strong rope as well.
Those things will be ready in 2 days,
promised the king. The look on his face was very serious. Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 7, Saving Lilliput. Two days later, everything I needed for my plan was ready. This morning I will go to Blefuscu, I told the king.
I hope your plan works,
he replied.
Lilliput's fate depends on you.
I'll be back soon, I said. I went down to the shore, carrying the 50 hooks. Each had a rope tied to it. I took off my shoes and socks, waded into the sea, and headed for Blefuscu. The water between the two islands was shallow, so I could walk most of the way. Soon, I reached the harbor of Blefuscu. When the Blefuscans saw me, they were very frightened. I heard someone shout,
Ah! A giant! Run for your lives!
Another man screamed.
That monster will kill us all!
The Blefuscans jumped out of their ships and swam to shore. Many of the people shot arrows at me. To each ship, I attached a hook and rope. Then I gathered all the ropes and began to pull them. None of the ships moved.
What's the problem?
I wondered. Then I understood.
It's the anchors.
Each ship had a heavy anchor that kept it in place. I went from ship to ship and cut all the anchor ropes with my knife. Then I pulled on the ropes I had tied to the ships. Slowly, they started to move. I walked through the waves, pulling the ships behind me. On the shore, the Blefuscans shouted and screamed as I towed their ships away. They could do nothing to prevent me. Luckily, the tide was out and the water was becoming shallower. I did not have to swim and pull the ships at the same time. I could wade all the way back to Lilliput. The king of Lilliput and many other people were watching from the shore of that island. They could see the ships coming. They could not see me because only my head was above water. They were in despair. They thought that the Blefuscans were attacking Lilliput and that I must have drowned. As I neared the shore, I called out,
Long live the king of Lilliput!
When the king and his people finally saw me, they shouted,
Hooray! Welcome back!
They were very happy to see me. The king even came to meet me at the edge of the water.
My people and I are very grateful to you, enormous one.
He said,
You have saved Lilliput. Thank you.
I am happy that I could help you.
I replied.
You are very brave.
The king continued,
From now on, you will be one of my chief advisors.
That is a great honor.
I said to the king.
Now I would like to ask another favor.
He said,
Go back and steal the rest of the Blefuscans' ships. Then they will never be able to attack us again. I will have power over them forever. I will destroy all the big Endians. I will be king of everywhere.
I'm sorry, Your Majesty.
I replied.
I cannot agree to do that.
Why not?
He demanded.
Blefuscu is a good country like Lilliput,
I said,
and should be free like Lilliput. I think the two countries should live in peace from now on.
I want the rest of the Blefuscan ships.
The king insisted.
You must obey my order.
I cannot help you, Your Majesty.
I told him again. I tried to make him understand my point of view, but I failed. The king was very angry because I refused to do as he asked. Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 8, A Peace Offer. The king never forgot my refusal to take the rest of the Blefuscan ships. I had prevented the Blefuscans from attacking Lilliput, but he was still angry with me. Some of the king's men agreed with my decision.
You did the right thing,
one of them told me. Not everyone, however, felt the same way.
You are a traitor!
Another of the king's advisors growled at me. Through my friends in the palace, I heard that I now had some secret enemies. From then on, they and the king were against me. About 3 weeks passed. One day, the Blefuscan king sent 6 of his officials to Lilliput to speak for him. The officials had a long meeting with the Lilliputian king. Because I was still one of his chief officials, I was at the meeting.
Your Majesty,
Said the chief official from Blefuscu.
our king would like to make peace with you. Blefuscu and Lilliput have been at war for too long. Many of our people have died or been hurt.
It has been a long war.
Sighed the king. He and the visiting officials discussed how their countries could get along without fighting. The king of Lilliput wanted the king of Blefuscu to agree to certain conditions. After hours of discussion, the two sides reached an agreement.
I accept your king's peace offer.
The king of Lilliput said finally.
Tell him that I will have my chief official write up an agreement. Then your king and I will sign it.
I was surprised, but happy to hear Lilliput's king say this. The two countries would no longer be at war. The next day, the Blefuscan officials came to see me.
Our king has heard of your refusal to take the rest of his ships.
The chief official said.
He asked me to thank you. He thinks you are a generous giant. He invites you to come to Blefuscu for a visit.
I would be delighted to travel to Blefuscu and meet your king.
I replied.
I will ask the king of Lilliput for his permission to visit soon.
The Blefuscans were no longer angry with me for taking their ships. I was happy that they were ready to forgive and forget. Our meeting continued for a few hours. The Blefuscan officials were curious about me. They had never met a giant before, and they asked me many questions.
Would you do something to show us how strong you are?
One asked.
Of course.
I replied. Just outside my house was a large rock. It was much bigger than the tiny Blefuscans. I picked it up with both my hands. Even for me, it was quite heavy. I threw it into an empty field as the Blefuscans watched.
Your strength is amazing,
The chief official exclaimed. When the visit ended, he repeated his invitation.
Come to visit us soon in Blefuscu,
He said.
I will give a good report of you to our king.
A few days later, I had a chance to speak to the king of Lilliput.
Your Majesty,
I said.
the king of Blefuscu has invited me to visit his island. I would like to go. May I have your permission, please?
Yes.
The king replied, although his manner was quite cold.
You may visit Blefuscu. But let me know before you leave Lilliput.
Gullivers Travels, Chapter 9, Fire at the Palace. From then on, the king of Lilliput did not demand much of me. I suppose that was because he no longer liked me. I could do as I pleased and go wherever I liked in Lilliput. Not long after the Blefuscan officials visited me, I had an opportunity to help the king of Lilliput. About midnight one night, people screaming outside my house woke me up. They were frantic, and I could not understand what they were shouting. Suddenly, some palace officials arrived.
Hurry!
One of them cried.
You must come with us. It's an emergency. The palace is on fire.
Of course.
I replied and rushed to get dressed.
Jump onto my hand. I'll carry you all so that we'll get there quickly.
We hurried to the palace. The fire had started by accident in the room of one of the queen's maids. A burning candle had fallen over and some curtains caught on fire. When we arrived, the fire was out of control. Many people were trying to put it out. 2 ladders were leaning up against the castle walls near the open windows of the maid's room. A man was at the top of each ladder. People were passing buckets of water up to those men. The men threw water on the flame, but it did not do much good. The Lilliputian buckets were tiny and held very little water. As each minute passed, the fire burned more strongly.
The The fire spread to another room!
cried one of the men on the ladder.
The whole palace might burn down!
Shouted the other one. A feeling in my body suddenly gave me an idea. The night before, I had drunk quite a lot of wine. The wine had made me very thirsty. So I had drunk a lot of water too, enough to fill about 20 Lilliputian barrels. I had felt so tired after drinking the wine that I had fallen asleep right away. I could feel all that water still inside me. The firefighters did not have enough water to put out the fire, but I did.
Stand back!
I shouted to them.
I will put out the fire. Please turn your backs to me and don't look.
I did just what a little boy would do when he is outside and needs to go to the bathroom. I aimed through the open windows at the fire. Soon, the fire was out.
Hooray!
Shouted the crowd of people who had been watching.
3 cheers for the enormous one! He has saved the palace!
The emergency was over, so I went back to my house. I was happy that I had been able to put out the fire, but I was worried that the king would not like the way I had done it. The king had a law about people doing what I had done right outside the palace. The next day, the king sent me a message. It said,
Enormous one, your behavior was against the law. I realize, though, that there was no other way to put out the fire. So I will excuse your bad behavior just this once. I am grateful that you saved my palace.
The queen was not as understanding as the king. My behavior disgusted her. She told everyone she would not allow the burnt part of the palace to be repaired.
I will never go into those rooms again,
She said.
I will never forgive the giant. He has no manners.
Gulliver's Travels, Chapter 10, The Plot Against Gulliver. Several of the king's officials did not like me. One, whose name was Flimnap, hated me for some reason. Flimnap and his supporters had convinced the king that I was dangerous. They thought I was a threat to him and their country. Luckily, I had a friend who was a lord in the court of the king. Late one night, my friend visited me secretly.
Enormous one,
He said,
you know that you have enemies in Lilliput. Many of them are jealous of you. Flimnap tells lies about you. He says that you have done very bad things that are against the law. The punishment for these bad things is death.
I have always tried to help the king.
I said. I felt upset and began to shout. I took the Blefuscan's ships for him. I saved the palace. I helped end the war.
Talk quietly. Flimnap's spies may be listening,
said the lord, with fear in his voice.
Flimnap will kill me if he finds out I've told you this.
What are my enemies saying about me? I asked nervously.
They keep telling the king that you are against him,
replied my friend.
You did not return to Blefuscu and steal the rest of the ships. You did not help destroy all the big Endians. Your enemies here say that you are an enemy of Lilliput.
They are twisting the truth, I said. My actions were good.
The king of Lilliput reminded the bad officials that you had helped him.
The lord went on.
But your enemies are very powerful. They suggested setting your house on fire while you are asleep in it. Then you would die in the fire.
What? I exclaimed. I was very angry. Flimnap and the others are evil men.
But the king decided that you will not be killed,
said my friend.
Reldresal helped make things better for you.
Reldresal? What did he do?
He said you had made mistakes, but you had been a big help sometimes. He asked the king to be generous. He said that instead of being killed, you should lose your sight.
But that's horrible!
I was shocked.
Then you would still be strong enough to work for the king,
explained the lord.
but you would not be a threat to him or to Lilliput.
I thought Reldresal was a friend.
I put my hands over my eyes.
Reldresal will visit you in a few days to tell you about this. Then the king will order his men to shoot arrows into your eyes. You will be blind.
I can't believe anyone would do such a terrible thing,
I exclaimed.
but thank you for warning me about this awful plan.
Think about what to do,
said my friend,
and make a decision soon.
The Lord left and went back to the palace. I stayed up all night and thought about what to do. I could kill the king and all the bad men. I did not like that idea. The king had been kind to me in the past. But because he was weak, he listened to Flimnap and the other bad men. It did not take me very long to decide that I must escape from Lilliput.
This is a very good time,
I said to myself.
to go to Blefuscu.